I know you were expecting me to say medication. No, it's not medication, it's meditation. Order, honorable members. The Secretary will read the first to fifth orders together.
Medium-term budget policy statement, introduction of the Adjustments Appropriation Bill, introduction of the Special Appropriation Bill, introduction of the Rates and Monetary Amounts and Amendment of Revenue Laws Bill, and introduction of the Taxation Laws Amendment Bill.
I now recognize the Honorable, the Minister of Finance.
Honorable Speaker, His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa, Deputy President David Mabuza,
Order.
Cabinet colleagues.
Order, order. I'm sorry, Honorable Minister. Honorable Minister, will you be seated? Honorable members. No. Honorable members. Honorable members. Honorable members who have placards in the House.
I can continue.
Will you please take your seats, lower the placards and take your seat.
On a point of order, Speaker.
Honorable member.
On a point of order, Speaker. On a point of order.
Minister, please take your seat.
On a point of order.
Honorable Shivambo.
Speaker.
Honorable Shivambo, you have the floor.
Speaker, in terms of the rules of the National Assembly, we are permitted to display placards
Sound.
to protest.
Sound. Honorable Shivambo.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Now I was saying in terms of the rules of the National Assembly, we are permitted as members of Parliament to display placards in protest or in communication of certain messages. And that is exactly what members of Parliament of the economic freedom fighters are doing, to send a clear message to the person who is presenting the MTBBS today of what we are communicating in the placards now. So there is absolutely nothing wrong that members of Parliament of the economic freedom fighters are doing currently. It is our right. We've been elected to do whatever we wish to do, as long as that is within the confines of the rules of the National Assembly. And that is exactly.
Except that you are not audible, Honorable Shivambo.
I can start from scratch.
No, don't start. Start where you left off.
I was saying that you can't instruct the members of Parliament to lower the placards because it is permitted in terms of the rules of the National Assembly to display pamphlets in the sittings of the National Assembly. That is a fact. You can check that with the table staff. They will confirm exactly what we are saying.
Honorable Shivambo, are you objecting to the fact that I've called for a point of order? The point of order I am raising, one, is the fact that you are up on your feet and you are holding placards inside the chamber.
So, Speaker, what we can do, we'll sit down.
Will you please take your seat,
We'll sit
Honorable
down, but the
Shivambo?
placards are going to remain up because such is permitted in terms of the rules of this House. That must be clear in terms of how we proceed.
Honorable Khatebe. Honorable Khatebe.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I'm rising on the rule that we know very well that the rules of Parliament do not allow the party political logos inside the House. So those placards are having party political logos. So I think that they are out of order. They must be ruled upon. Thank you.
Honorable Khatebe, will you please repeat yourself? Members, before I have ruled against what you are doing, you will not be allowed to make noise here.
Yeah.
Yes, I am requesting you and I'm appealing to you to maintain order and the decorum of the House. Yes, Honorable Khatib.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I'm rising on a point of order that the party political regalia or logos cannot be displayed in the House of Parliament. Number two, there is no rule which says that the placards can be raised up in the House. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, honorable members.
Thank you very much, Speaker. The point of order that has been raised by the
Take
member.
your seat. I did not give you the floor. Take your seat and ask for a point of order. Take your seat. Hlala phansi.
Please recognize.
Hlala phansi.
Please recognize Speaker.
Take your seat.
Thank you very much, Speaker.
Honorable members, just take note that I will not, Mautwe, honorable members, uzawuphuma. I don't know if you guys are happy with being thrown out every day from the chamber. I don't know if that is what you want.
Other point of order, Speaker.
Honorable Mautwe,
Other point of order.
Honorable Tambo, sit down. Pembo, sit down. Take your seat. Take your seat. And behave like an honorable member. Hayi nizanikhupha. Nizawuphuma one by one. Now, I recognize you, Honorable Pembo.
Thank you very much, Speaker. The starting point was that the point of order that was raised by the member who rose to say that we as the economic freedom fighters were raising logos and so on is mute because there's no logo that you can see here. No starting point. There's no starting point. Speaker, can I be protected? That's the starting point. But the other point of order, Speaker, the other point, Speaker, is that you, when you were calling me to order, of which I concede, that is the starting point, is that you used unparliamentary affiliation of saying "Nca." That is absolutely wrong. I accept that you can say to me, you can't stand in this parliament without being recognized. But the fact that you can take a platform sitting there, and we have said this to you, that you can't do what you're doing. Say to us, sit down, you have not been recognized. But to say "Nca" is an expression of your impatience for us and your
The
attitude.
Speaker, order.
Speaker.
Take your seat. You've made your point, honorable members.
My point is not
The
made.
Speaker withdraws "Nca." I do not recall using it, but I am withdrawing "Nca." Shall we proceed, please?
Speaker, my point is this point, Speaker. Speaker.
Godongwana, take the floor.
Speaker,
You've
the
made
point-
your point,
no,
take
Speaker,
your seat.
The point is that the order on the EFF is mute.
Take your spit.
There is no logo of the EFF that
Take
stands
your
here
seat.
now, right now. The
Take your
placard
seat.
stands as we speak now. Thank you very much.
Take your seat. Thank you. Honorable members, we proceed. Honorable Godongwana, Minister, please take the floor and proceed with your speech, please.
I said, Madam Speaker, His Excellency, the President of the Republic of South Africa, His Excellency Deputy President, colleagues, Cabinet Ministers, members of the Executive Council for Finance, honorable members, the Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Services, fellow South Africans. I'm honored to table the following documents before this House. The 2022 Division of Revenue Amendment Bill, the 2022 Adjustment Appropriation Bill, the Special Appropriation Bill, the 2022 Rates and Monetary Amounts and Amendments of Revenue Laws Bill, the 2022 Taxation Laws Amendment Bill, the 2022 Tax Administration Laws Amendment Bill, the Revised Fiscal Framework, the 2022 Adjusted Estimate of National Expenditure, the 2022 Medium-Term Budget Policy Statement. Madam Speaker, the strategic goal of this government is to reduce poverty, inequality, unemployment in pursuit of better life for all. It was former President Nelson Mandela who reminded us that, and I quote, democracy will have little content and indeed will be short-lived if we cannot address our socio-economic problems within an expanded and growing economy. South Africa's economy is underperformed for many years. Several long-standing structural impediments continue to hamper growth. These include unreliable electricity supply, costly and inefficient ports and rail networks, crime and corruption, weak state capacity, and high levels of material concentration and barriers to entry that suppress the emergence and growth of small business. These challenges undermine our efforts to create jobs, contributing to high levels of poverty and inequality. Our structural challenges have been exacerbated by new ones, including global economic slowdown, high energy and food prices, the destruction caused by natural disasters such as the recent floods. The 2022 Medium-Term Budget Policy Statement aims to address the needs of South Africans and secure our future stability and prosperity. It provides for spending adjustment to continue rebuilding lives and infrastructure following devastating flood damages earlier this year. It restores fiscal strength and rebuilds fiscal space despite the unfavorable economic backdrop. It enhances the quality of public service such as education and health. It also prioritizes the safety and security of our people and invests in future growth by increasing funding for critical infrastructure. Madam Speaker, let me now turn to the economic outlook. Many of the risks we outlined in the February 2022 budget speech have materialized. Globally, these include rising inflation, tightening financial conditions, and the ongoing effect of COVID-19, including more stringent lockdown in China and their impact on global demand and supply chains. These were made worse by the outbreak of the Russian-Ukraine conflict. As a result, the IMF global growth forecast for 2022 has been revised downward. from 4.4% to 3.2%, and the 2023 estimate from 3.8% to 2.7%. This means that the global environment will be less supportive of our growth than we anticipated at the time of the budget. The outlook contains many risks, notably further slowing global growth and high inflation and the Russian-Ukraine conflict. There is also a possibility of energy rationing in Europe that will impact on global energy prices and output. A further decline in Chinese economic growth could slow global demand and add pressure to global supply chains, while the tightening of monetary policy could slow global output even further. These are significant risks in the global environment. In this context, small open economies like ours need to be especially careful and have solid fiscal buffers in place to weather the coming storms. Domestically, the robust pace of economic recovery in early 22 was derailed by floods in various parts of the economy, particularly KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Cape. Industrial action in key sectors and widespread power cuts. We now expect real GDP growth to be 1.9% in 2022, compared with an estimated 2.1% in February. Over the next 2 years, the economy is expected to grow at an average of 1.6%. This level of growth is too low to support our developmental goals. Accordingly, we must take action to put our economy on a higher growth trajectory. Our approach to growth is based on clear and stable macroeconomic framework, complemented by the implementation of structural reforms to improve competitiveness, industrial policy to boost manufacturing, and measures to strengthen the capacity of the state. Key elements of our macroeconomic sector are stable and flexible exchange rate, low and stable inflation, and sustainable fiscal policy. Since the budget in February, we have accelerated the implementation of structural reforms to address binding constraints on economic growth and support investment and job creation. Madam Speaker, the intensity of load shedding is having a disastrous effect on our economy. We have therefore focused on our efforts on reforms in this sector, in the electricity sector. Several policies and regulatory changes aimed at creating a competitive energy market are also underway. These include the removal of the licensing threshold for embedded generation projects, where the pipeline has grown to 100 projects, representing over 9,000 megawatts of capacity. The Electricity Regulation Amendment Bill has been finalized. It provides for the establishment of an independent transmission and a systems operator, which will fundamentally transform the electricity sector, reducing South Africa's reliance on a simply monopoly utility and unlocking massive new private sector investment in generation capacity will contribute significantly to long-term energy security. Madam Speaker, there is a crisis in our logistics sector. Inefficiencies in port and rail are costing the economy billions and further undermine our efforts to raise growth. We welcome the end of the strike, a Transnet strike, and are working with Transnet leadership and all stakeholders to urgently address the challenges in the sector. Several steps are being taken to introduce greater competition and efficiency into ports and railway. The National Assembly has passed the Economic Regulation of Transport Bill. It will establish independent transport regulator to encourage greater competition and enable regulated access to the network. In addition, requests for proposal have been issued for third-party access to the freight rail network and private sector participation for the Durban Port Pier 2 and Enoch Godongwana terminals. In the telecommunications sector, the auction of high-value broadband spectrum has been completed. The next step is to complete digital migration to release frequencies. The Minister of Communication and Digital Technologies will shortly indicate a new date for analog switch off. In the water sector, we have accelerated the backlog of water use licenses. The process to establish a water regulator through the National Water Resource Infrastructure Agency Bill is also on track. This agency will enable effective management of bulk water infrastructure and facilitate private sector investment. The review of the work visa system has been completed with recommendations to attract skills and investment. Honorable members, these reforms are not the totality of our reform agenda. More must and can be done to unleash dynamism of our economy. Key to this is the need for a capable developmental state. Madam Speaker, a strong and capable state is a necessary precondition for growth. The state is responsible for creating and maintaining an enabling environment for growth and investment. It provides basic services and promotes the rule of law. To do this effectively, the state needs to be responsive to societal needs, prioritize, sequence, and coordinate interventions through institutions that are accountable and capable. Leveraging fixed investment is a critical part of our achieving sustainable and inclusive growth. It supports economic recovery, raises the economic potential, and creates jobs. We have seen gross fixed capital formation contract on average by 4.4% annually between 2016 and 2020, from a peak of 796 billion in 2025. The contraction has been broad-based. Private sector investment, which accounts for nearly 2/3 of total fixed investment, as well as the public sector, have both declined. We seek to reverse these trends by tackling impediments to investment. In the private sector, policy uncertainty, constraints to the ease of doing business, along with the high cost of doing business, are often cited as key constraints to investment. Our clear and stable macroeconomic progress on structural transformation, supporting enabling growth will go a long way to removing impediments to investment. They will also boost confidence and create an enabling environment for the private sector to invest. With respect to public sector investment, state-owned enterprises have an important role to play in the provision of critical economic goods and services in the economy. Addressing this supply constraint, particularly in the energy and transport sectors, is critical to support higher and sustainable economic growth. On general government, we are increasing on-budget infrastructure allocations to remedy the erosions of baselines. Over the medium term, government consolidated spending on building new and rehabilitating existing infrastructure will increase from 66.7 billion in 2022-23 to 112.5 billion in 2025-26. This includes roads, bridges, stormwater system, and public buildings. This makes spending on capital assets by the fastest growing item by economic classification. By delivering on public sector investment, we'll crowd in private sector investment, improve public service provision, and address backlogs, thus ignite a vicious cycle of high investment, growth, and employment potential. We are also committed to improving state capacity, project planning, preparation, procurement practices, and contract management. This will address the underspending of allocated infrastructure budgets, improve value for money and efficacy of our investment. Madam Speaker, climate change is reshaping the world around us, including our economic context. It poses physical risk to our people, infrastructure, the environment, and production of, including the critical goods such as food. The global response to climate must be coordinated. For our part, we are finalizing negotiations on the pledges by the International Partner Group for the Just Energy Transition. In addition, the investment plan supporting our energy transition was recently endorsed by Cabinet. We will take all necessary steps to ensure that our transition is just. Madam Speaker, when government finances are saddled with debt, it becomes very difficult to meet our developmental objectives. For nearly 15 years, the South African government has been tabling higher deficits. As a result, government debt is projected to be more than 4.7 trillion in our current financial year, compared to 627 billion in the year 2008-2009. This debt is incurring debt service cost that will average 354 billion per year over the medium-term expenditure framework. As already outlined, the global economy is slowing, inflation is increasing, financial markets are becoming more volatile. The result is that the debt service costs are estimated to be 5.9 billion higher in 2022-23 than it was thought at the time of the February budget. Moreover, the possibility of a major price correction in financial markets is a significant risk. This will affect fiscal revenues going forward. It is for this reason that the medium-term strategy needs to maintain a prudent approach to fiscal policy. We need to decrease our debt burden and debt service costs by reducing our annual deficit. This will stabilize public finances and reduce the fiscal risk. Honourable members, we are making progress in this regard. A consolidated fiscal deficit of 4.9% of GDP is projected in 2022-2023. This will decline to 3.2% of GDP by 2025-2026. A primary fiscal surplus of 0.7% of GDP will be achieved in 23-24. This is 1 year earlier than projected at the 2021 medium-term budget policy statement. We also now expect gross government debt to stabilize at 71.4% of GDP in 2022-23, 2 years earlier and at a lower level than projected in the 2022 budget review. Among other things, this means that we are proposing that no budget reduction are implemented in the 2023 budget. In fact, consolidated government spending will exceed 2.2 trillion this year and will rise to 2.5 trillion in 25-26. Turning to revenue, since the 2022 budget, revenue collection has exceeded projections, and the gross tax revenue estimate for 2022-23 has been revised up by 83.5 billion to 1.68 trillion. The higher estimate is largely due to improvements in corporate income tax collections, with strong receipts from the finance and manufacturing sectors. This is better than expected revenue collection estimates, including over the medium term, have allowed government to narrow the deficit and mitigate lingering and new risk. Equally, it allows us to gradually restore the baseline budgets of departments key to the delivery of services without making unaffordable permanent commitments. A portion of higher than anticipated revenue will be utilized as follows. First, reduce the deficit in the current financial year and over the MTF, make additions for infrastructure projects, critical public services such as education, health, and policing, addressing fiscal risks that were previously identified in February. These include higher than projected debt service costs, the public service wage bill, and the materialization of financial risk from some state-owned companies. Should any of the fiscal risks materialize, this could negatively affect the fiscal position and government's efforts to stabilize the public finances. Madam Speaker, we are allocating a net addition of 13 billion in spending adjustment for this 2022-23 financial year in the adjustment appropriation bill. The largest adjustment of that 13 billion is 6.3 billion, which is equal to 49% of the total, is allocated towards this disaster relief, especially the April flooding in several parts of the country. Other adjustment in the adjustment appropriation include 308 million for 24 rural bridges through a program called Willisizo Rural Bridges. I must explain, this amount is only for in-year. For the next outer years, we're penciling in for all provinces. This will cover only 2 provinces which are ready with their bridges, that is Eastern Cape and Limpopo. 500 million rand is also set aside to kick off the Home Affairs digitization program that will employ 10,000 young people over 3 years. 118 million is to deal with an interim allocation cost to prepare for the rebuilding of Parliament. I think I need to explain that because there are 2 amounts included in that. The first amount relates to how much Parliament is, I'm going to make the figure at the end, how much it will cost Parliament to rebuild it. And then how much between now and March can be allocated towards rebuilding Parliament. That amount is penciled in. The second amount in that 118 is an amount that says, in between as a result of the fire, Parliament has incurred additional costs it has not factored in, including offices, including this address today was not budgeted to be outside, it was budgeted to be in Parliament, not to be here. So Parliament is paying extra cost by being here. So you've got 2 amounts to get the technical work for the rebuilding. Secondly, for what is called unavoidable and unforeseen for Parliament. Honourable members, during the current financial year, wage negotiations have been taking place at the Public Service Coordinating Bargaining Council. On the 30th of August 2022, government made a final offer which emanated from a facilitated process. Underline that. From a facilitated process, and a tentative agreement was reached and was tabled before the Bargaining Council. All parties undertook to go and seek mandates. Then the unions came back and said they do not have a mandate. But it must be understood that there was a tentative agreement facilitated. This offer includes the continuation of non-pensionable cash allowance for the current financial. This translates into an average of 1,000 rand per employee per month until March 2023. It also translates that cash control into 4.5% for the wage bill, and another pensionable salary increase of 3% for public servants. That together in total comes to 27.5%. Madam Speaker, the offer on the table is the best interest of the fiscals and public service workers. Implementing it does not undermine the collective bargaining process. We believe that the facilitation process has helped all parties get to this point. Therefore, the spending estimates we are tabling today include this amount. This offer will be implemented through the payroll system and backdated to April 2022. Honourable members, our budget over the next 3 years is focused on restoring service delivery and laying the foundations for a higher growth. Medium changes to spending plans are driven mainly by government's decision to extend the special COVID-19 social relief distress grant by 1 year until 31 March 2024. The fiscal framework also includes funding for cadetry costs of the 2022-2023 public service increases, as well as for safety and security, infrastructure investment, and service delivery. The SRD grant was introduced in May 2022 as a temporary measure to respond to the needs of the most vulnerable who were affected by lockdown measures. It has been extended several times since then. Discussions on the future of the grant are ongoing and involve very difficult trade-offs and financing decisions. Despite the provision made in this budget, I want to reiterate that any permanent extension or replacement will require permanent increases in revenues, reduction in spending elsewhere, or a combination of both. Madam Speaker, this is what is meant by trade-offs, balancing the need to address one priority over another. Overall, consolidated government spending is projected to increase to 2.21 trillion in 2023, 2.48 in 25-26, at an average growth of 4%. The social wage totaling 3.56 trillion over the next 3 years, or put differently, 59.2% of the consolidated non-interest spending, will take up the biggest share of the budget in support of poor households and the most vulnerable in our society. The largest allocations are directed to the education, health, and social development sectors. Moreover, over the next 3 years, spending increases will be prioritized to improve investment in infrastructure and boost the budget for safety, security, and fighting corruption. Overall, government's consolidated capital spending will increase from 95.1 billion in 22-23 to 145 billion in 25-26. This excludes spending on state-owned enterprises. We are working closely with the presiding officers of Parliament to restore and rebuild Parliament. Over the medium-term expenditure framework, we have made allowances for approximately 2 billion for rebuilding of Parliament. Madam Speaker, over the next years, we will work with provinces and municipalities to make meaningful progress in achieving our developmental goals. Municipalities shape the living conditions of our people. They ensure that people have access to cleaning, drinking water, energy, housing, and sanitation. Yet several municipalities are dysfunctional, experiencing either financial or leadership crisis, reflected in a general inability to deliver services. Following a diagnostic review of the local government capacity building system, the National Treasury is coordinating with key stakeholders, including the Department of Cooperative Governance, SALGA, and provinces in the design of capacity building systems towards a more integrated and outcome-focused approach. Over the next 3 years, we propose allocation of 48.4% of available non-interest spending to national departments, 41.4% to provinces, and 10.1% to local government. This will allow provinces to support basic education and health services, roads, housing, social development, and agriculture. We're also allocating additional funds to local government to support the delivery of free basic services to poor households. Considering the rise of cost of the free basic service, as well as the rising bulk electricity and water costs, the 2023 budget review will provide more detail on these efforts. Madam Speaker, some of the state-owned companies represent critical components of our economic activity, especially in transport, engineering, and energy. These companies should be self-sufficient and must contribute to economic growth. Unfortunately, we face a situation where financial weaknesses caused in previous years by bad leadership and corruption still needs to be resolved. Moreover, when unavoidable events such as the recent floods destroy infrastructure and assets, it puts the whole economy at risk. In the meantime, the road network must function, ports must operate, and critical technical projects cannot be halted. So, as balance sheets are being restored, and those who looted and mismanaged them are being held accountable, including through the criminal justice system, we have little choice but to act to keep these key services running. We are proposing to use higher than anticipated revenues in the current year to reduce risk from specific SOEs. These resources cannot be used to fund baseline increases as they are once off. Using them in this way will also not expand the fiscal deficit compared to our existing medium-term plans. The financial support to SOEs recognizes their potential to contribute to our long-term growth prospects. We are thus tabling a special appropriation bill to provide additional funding to Denel, Transnet, and Sandra. These allocations will allow these entities to adjust their business models and restore their long-term financial viability. Fiscal support to state-owned companies remains a challenging balancing act given the many competing priorities and limited resources. Funding to SOEs will now come with strict pre- and post-conditions. Pre-conditions mean that SOE will need to comply with these conditions before they receive government support, and not after. Non-compliance to conditions means no funding. Transnet is allocated 2.9 billion to ensure the return of out-of-service locomotives. This will be complemented by 2.9 billion from in-year spending adjustment to deal with flood damage that affected its operations in eThekwini. Denel is allocated 3.4 billion to support recent progress made to stabilize the entity. This allocation will be augmented by 1.8 billion in sale of non-core assets and will unlock committed order book of 12 billion awaiting execution. Honourable members, the uncertainty surrounding the Gauteng improvement project continues to have a major negative implication for road construction in the country. We need to move on from the debates of previous years and find solution to this challenge. To resolve this funding impasse, the Gauteng provincial government has agreed to contribute 30% to settling Sanral's debt and interest obligations, while national government covers 70% of this. Gauteng will also cover the cost of maintaining 201 kilometers and associated with the 201 kilometers and associated interchanges of the roads, and any additional investment in road will be funded through their existing electronic toll infrastructure or new toll plaza or any other revenue source which within their area of responsibility. Let me just explain this because it became, okay, before that, let me do this. Government proposes to make an initial allocation of 23.7 billion from the national fiscus, which will be dispersed on strict conditions. Let me then explain, because there was something which, when I addressed the media, let me explain this thing. For 7 years, we've been battling with e-toll in Gauteng. And for all the political wrangling, it has had an impact on the balance sheet of Sandra. What is the implication? Now, Sandra can default any time. So we've agreed with Gauteng. Gauteng, take your toll, your roads. We will take the debt, a better portion of it, but you will contribute 30% of it. From then, Tina as national singaphandle ngebail uzihambela wedwa mntaseka. Moving forward, if you decide to maintain the roads, you as Gauteng, you can either toll to get the maintenance, or you can, from your own revenue, do something about that. So, say value it all from today in that sense. There are implications. There are implications. What are those implications? Gauteng is still yet going to do phase 2 of this project. It's going to be important that in doing phase 2, proper planning and thinking on how to fund phase 2 must take place. That's one of the implications we must have. It also has got implication on the user pay principle. Turning to Eskom, for at least a decade, we spent billions of rands supporting Eskom with limited improvements in the reliability of the electricity supply or the financial health of the company. To ensure Eskom's long-term financial viability, government will take over a significant portion of the utility's 400 billion debt. While the selection of the relevant debt instruments and the method of effecting the relief is still to be determined, the quantum is expected to be between 1/3 and 2/3 of Eskom's debt. The debt takeover, once finalized, together with other reforms, will ensure that Eskom is financially sustainable. This program will allow Eskom to focus on plant performance and capital investment and ensure that it no longer relies on permanent bailouts. Importantly, the program will include strict conditions required of Eskom and other stakeholders before and during the debt transfer. These conditions will address Eskom's structural challenges by managing the cost addressing the municipal and household debt due to the utility, and providing clarity on transparency and in tariff pricing. In addition, the conditions will be informed by Treasury-led independent review of Eskom operations, in particular the performance of its fleet. In other words, if I want to explain this thing, for us to be able to say to Eskom, these are the outcomes we require as we change debt, we need from ourselves to be informed. In that regard, we have said we want an independent review of people who are going to assist us to analyze what is happening in Eskom, so that we should be able to attach conditions which are appropriate. Further details of this program will be finalized following consultation with all relevant stakeholders and lenders, and will be announced in the 2023 budget. Madam Speaker, I must say, we made a commitment in the budget that we'll provide more detail, including the quantum on this Eskom. However, dealing with financial individuals is quite a complicated issue, President. Lenders are quite a difficult crowd to deal with. In the process of doing all of these things, trying to find out what the quantum should be, we've got to negotiate with the lenders. There are legal implications and so on and so on. But we're still committed to make our decision within the financial year, because in February we said within the financial year. We didn't say by the medium term. So we'll still make that commitment by the financial year in terms of even the quantum. We are also adopting best practices in the procurement of goods and services, including the highest standard of transparency in the tendering process. Such modernization aims to simplify and speed up the process of public infrastructure projects while reducing the scope of looting and corruption. Here, the issue is, Dr. Ramkhopa tells us that the underspending on infrastructure per annum is 43 billion rand. And largely of that relates to skills issue, corruption, regulatory framework which is problematic. Tight regulatory framework. I was addressing a meeting somewhere, somebody raised their hand and said, when are you going to stop Regulation 16, which is frustrating triple Ps? I didn't know about Regulation 16. I went back to the office to check what Regulation 16 does. It turns out it also makes people to triple Ps to take over a three-year period. So those minor things need to be removed from the system in order to make sure that procurement can be effective. We expect to introduce the public procurement bill, which will enhance transparency, integrity, and promoting the use of technology for efficiency and effectiveness in the public procurement to Parliament by March 2023. Honorable Maswangai will bear with us. The government, in South Africa, there's a democratic process. The consultation process is beyond us. Just NEDLEC alone, I don't know how many months it took us in NEDLEC, but we're still committed to do it within this fiscal year. The new preferential procurement regulations of 2022, replacing the now invalid regulations of 2017, will be promulgated in November 2022 to be effective from the 16th of January 2023. The regulations empower organs of the state with the authority to determine their own preferential procurement policies within the ambit of the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act. I must add, yes, the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa says it is the organ of state that procures. It's the organ, every organ of state must have its own procurement policy, not be getting permission now and again from Treasury. So we're giving you that authority, each organ of the state to be able to have its own procurement policies. No one will then say, if I don't deliver on time on my project, I'm delayed by Treasury. Madam Speaker, earlier this week, President Ramaphosa announced government's response to the recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture. It committed government to a new chapter in our struggle against corruption, to advance the renewal of our society. It noted the need for the state to be ethical and free of corruption as it serves the needs and interests of the people. As noted by the Commission, to enable service delivery, we should protect honest accounting officers and authorities who make decisions in good faith from criminal prosecution and civil litigation. In this regard, we'll strengthen the auditing and preventive control of systems to enable managers to manage while putting mechanisms to hold them accountable. The Commission of Inquiry into the State Capture made recommendations aimed at strengthening institutional governance and accountability mechanism. As has been done with Bain, we'll continue to take punitive administrative action against companies and individuals who have actively facilitated corruption and irregular activities. Madam Speaker, crime is a safe economic as well as a social issue. A safe environment is important for full participation in economic and social life. This makes fighting crime a key pillar of enhancing economic growth. Many South Africans' lives live in fear in their homes, in their places of work, and in places of recreation. In response, we are allocating additional resources to our security forces to take the fight to those that threaten our peace as a nation. We'll support the police to recruit an additional 15,000 constables over the next 3 years. This is in addition to the current 10,000 they are recruiting this year. Honourable members, we are doing everything necessary to prevent grey listing by the Financial Action Task Force, the international standard-setting body that oversees global compliance with anti-money laundering rules. Already we've tabled 2 bills in Parliament aimed at addressing weaknesses in our legislative framework. The bills are expected to be enacted by the end of this year. This will be a significant step towards meeting the 40 recommendations made by the Financial Action Task Force. We are also required to implement laws on anti-money laundering and corruption more effectively. Investing in building the capacity of our regulatory and enforcement institution is already bearing positive results. These include the Investigating Directorate of the National Prosecuting Authority has enrolled 26 cases, declared 89 investigations, and 165 accused persons have appeared in court for alleged state capture-related offenses. The Asset Forfeiture Unit has frozen or granted preservation orders to the value of 12.9 billion rand and returned a total of 2.9 billion to the affected entities. The SIU has instituted 4 High Court cases in relation to contracts worth 62.1 billion. And SARS investigations arising from the Commission's findings and evidence have resulted in collection of 4.8 billion in unpaid taxes. SARS is currently engaged in 18 projects involving 222 cases. 11 of those cases are recommendations explicitly for SARS to execute, and 8 have been finalized and others are under investigation. The 2022 medium-term budget policy statement proposes additional resources National Prosecuting Authority, the Special Investigation Unit, the Financial Intelligence Center, and the South African Revenue Services to further improve the capability of the state to investigate and prosecute sophisticated financial crimes. In addition, government will also publish a revised national risk assessment strategy on anti-money laundering and terror financing. Madam Speaker, let me conclude by reiterating what I said in the beginning of our democratic ideas. We'll be given life and sustained by growing and inclusive economy. We cannot ignore the relation between democracy and the economy, and the relation between politics and inequality. We are fortunate to have a legal and policy framework backed by political vision that allows us to transform the economic conditions of our people and deliver on the promise of democracy. The medium-term budget policy statement reminds us of the urgent need to pursue the reform of our economy in our consistent manner and with the freedom of our people in mind. We should not take lightly the link that former President Nelson Mandela made and other leaders that drew between thriving economy and a fair and just society. This is the golden thread that runs through our constitution. And in this medium-term budget policy statement, we should keep sight of this goal and the balancing act it entails as we do our work. Madam Speaker, I'm grateful to President Ramaphosa and Deputy President Mabuza for their support and leadership. And thank you to Deputy Minister of Finance and the National Treasury team, led by the Acting Director General. My sincere thanks to the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Service and the Governor of South African Reserve Bank. Of course, nonkosikazi noba kekho apha undijongile TV. Let me also thank my colleagues in the Ministers' Committee on the Budget and the Budget Council who have shared the load of tough decisions that have to be made. Similarly, the Parliamentary Committee of Finance and Appropriations. I express my sincere appreciation. Lastly, thank you to each and every South African, including you. I serve at your privilege. I thank you.
I thank the Honorable, the Minister. Honorable members, thank you, Honorable Minister. Honorable Minister, thank you. Honorable members, members should at all times uphold the dignity and decorum of the House. Ours is a chamber of debate and not a forum for protest. It is here that we engage one another verbally with due regard and respect. While Rule 64E provides that members may not, amongst others, bring weapons to any kind of dangerous or threatening articles, it is silent on the holding of placards in the chamber. This is a matter that is currently under consideration by the subcommittee on the review of rules. And I will ensure that the matter is brought to the Rules Committee at the earliest convenience. However, what is not in doubt is that you cannot use placards to insult one another. Our rules also apply to members, ministers, deputy ministers, even those who may not be members of Parliament. Order. The following members held up placards that are in breach of Rule 84 and 85. Honorable Mautwe, you've accused the minister of being a pervert. Honorable Chabangu and Honorable Makaula, you have accused the minister of being a sexual delinquent. Honorable Noluchungu, you've accused the minister of covering up for GPV. Honorable Ntlangwini and Honorable Hlonyana, you've accused. No, because I'm still on the floor and I'm ruling on a matter. I am ruling on a matter. Please take the floor, Honorable Shivambu. Now, Honorable Ntlangwini and Honorable Hlonyana, you've accused the minister of bribing his way. Now, Rule 84, honorable members, but I'm ruling on a point of order. I am on a point of order. Take your seat, Honorable Shivambu, please. Honorable Shivambu, please take your seat. Take your seat, Honorable Shivambu. Honorable Tlakute.
Thank you, Honorable.
This is the thing.
Thank you. Am I?
Okay, take your seat, honorable member. Honorable members, I'm sure you are all aware that when the presiding officer is ruling on a matter, before the presiding officer has completed that process, you may not raise a point of order. You have noted that throughout the session, I actually restrained myself and made sure that I do not continue to engage those who have placards in this House. I was now ruling. It is for that reason, Honorable Shivambo, that I did not grant you the opportunity. Honorable Shivambo, we will not have a circus here now. What we will have is you will allow us to Mautwe, honorable member. Just behave like an honorable member. You behave like an honorable member. Now, honorable members, use offensive, abusive, insulting, disrespectful, unbecoming, unparliamentary words or language, nor offensive, unbecoming, or threatening gestures. Rule 85(2) provides that a member who wishes to bring any improper or unethical conduct on the part of another member may do so in the form of a separate substantive motion. The members, therefore, I have cited, I order you, honorable members, to lower your placards. I also will refer this behavior to the Rules Committee. Rule 64, honorable members, provides that members are required not to take photographs or video footage during proceedings. Honorable Tambo, you acted in breach of this rule. I order you to delete the photograph or video. I bring your attention also to Section 21 of the Powers and Privileges Act, which prohibits broadcasting or transmission by electronic means of proceedings of the House without the authority of the House. Should this not be done, you may be in breach of the Powers and Privileges Act. Honorable members, as you have not, those of you I have directed to withdraw the placards, you have not done so. I will now rule on this matter and propose a way forward at the next sitting of the House. The papers that have been delivered to us by the Minister will be referred to the relevant committees. Honorable members, order. That now concludes the business of the House, and the House is adjourned.
I was saying because
I can't hear you because I got program in my ear.
okay.
Well, that concludes the business of the day. Of course, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana has just delivered his midterm budget policy statement. He calls it a positive statement in some parts. Our reporters are, of course, in Cape Town on standby to give us the very latest in terms of reactions from political parties as well as key players. Of course, our reporters Nompumelelo Siziba, Abra Barbria, as well as Bulelani Philip will bring us analysis and a lot of of the reaction. So, of course, one of the big things coming out there is assistance to SOEs, and of course the e-tolls matter that was affecting Gauteng, of course, being one of the things that have been discussed there. But let's now go to one of our reporters, Abra Barbary, who is on standby. Abra, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure a lot of reaction coming out of this midterm policy statement. Talk to us about what political parties are saying.
I am actually going to get them to talk to you about it themselves. Thank you very much. Steve, thank you. Mr. Swart, thank you for joining us. You had a lot of expectations when we spoke earlier on. The revenue windfall, you tell us, what were your thoughts?
Well, I think the 83 billion rand tax windfall must be used for fiscal consolidation. That is to reduce our debt and, of course, to improve the social network. And so that we do see is going to happen. We see that some of the debt will be reduced with that tax windfall, and we see 350 rand a month. The social relief grant will be extended. Our concerns are obviously the bailouts and, of course, the public sector wage bill, which has been penciled in at 3%. We know the unions are not going to accept that, so that can obviously escalate government debt levels if there is a concession there. The bailouts to SOEs are problematic as well, as it was undertaken in the past that it would not be necessary. And, of course, the debt now from Eskom that will go across to the sovereign debt levels, which will increase the sovereign debt levels. Eskom's problems need to be addressed. It's devastating to businesses and the economy, and it needs to be addressed. But this is a balancing act. We'll see the detail in February's budget, and we'll be studying that from the ACDP's perspective.
Mr. Swart, thank you so much for your time. I'm now going to have a chat with Wouter Wessel of the Freedom Front Plus. Let's start with the issue of bailouts. That seems to be something that lots of political parties were looking out for beforehand, and now it's as though your worst fears have been realized.
It has been realized, and the fact of the matter is that government debt is out of control. We're talking about 4.75 trillion rand in government debt. The debt service cost is out of control, and the fiscus can't afford it. And now a lot of the debt of these failed state-owned entities, such as Denel, is being absorbed by the state. And that is an unsustainable fiscal position that we are now in. A lot of money that is appropriated in the adjustment appropriation bill, although the minister is talking about prioritizing, for example, the corruption, the prosecution of those that have been named in the Zondo Commission report. If you compare the additional money that Justice is getting to other departments, then it's ludicrous. Department of Defense is getting 1.7 billion rand added to the baseline, whilst Justice is only getting 83 million. It's completely not actually what he said in there, and what's in the budget is not the same thing.
Mr. Wessels, thank you so much for your time. Let me just grab Yomzi Kwankwa of the UDM. I'm gonna shoot straight to bailouts with you as well, because this is a big issue for many parties. And then also let's talk about the fight against corruption while I have you.
Well, firstly, I think our sense is that this budget is like a poorly made homemade chakalaka. It's all over the tin, lacking focus. But also it's supposed to be spicy, but it lacks spiciness. There's nothing to celebrate out of it because it lacks focus. The issue about bailout packages that the government continues to dole out to entities is that they do not address the structural issues and challenges of these entities. Let me remind you that of the 570 billion rands that we have doled out in guarantees, government guarantees to entities, Eskom accounts for 70% of that, more than 70% of that. And that tells you that we keep bailing out Eskom without addressing the underlying root causes of the problem and governance challenges. The other issue here is that there seems to be no accountability all the time. What we do, we promise, the government promises that people are going to be prosecuted, people are going to be held to account for their actions, but we don't see any politicians being arrested. But what is happening is that we continue to bail out entities. You can't, for example, this budget doesn't tell you how you're going to grow the economy. Unless you saw it, I didn't. There's nothing about how to grow the economy. There's an acknowledgement that the projection over the medium term is 1.6%, but from what? I'm much obliged to you.
I'm so sorry about that. Let me now just link to my colleague Bulelani, who's on the other side of the floor. Bulelani?
Well, thank you so much, Abra. Of course, a lot of talking points on this midterm budget by the Finance Minister. Joining me now is the DA spokesperson on finance, Dr. Dion George. Dr. George, coming into this budget, you were hoping for several issues. Has the minister strike the right chords in terms of delivering on what your expectations were?
No, the minister fell very short of expectations. On growth, we were expecting at least some indication of how we would grow the economy. Instead, he confirmed what we already know, is that government wants to place itself at the center of our economy. Also, the bailouts to the state-owned enterprises basically confirms that the idea is we'll keep on trying this developmental state with a dysfunctional government at the center of it. So nothing in terms of how to grow business, especially small and medium and micro enterprises, and nothing about entrepreneurship. On debt, we were expecting at least some positive signs. Government has been saying that it was going to reduce debt over the next 2 years, but with a massive increase now on taking over Eskom's debt, possibly between 126 billion and 260 billion, that's going to push the debt up. So we're going the wrong way. We do not support the transfer of Eskom's debt onto the national balance sheet for the people to pay for. There can be another model. Also, if you look at support for vulnerable people, the minister was completely silent. He never even mentioned the word cost of living. He never mentioned food. He never mentioned that. So vulnerable South Africans are completely left behind. We do support the extension of the social grant. As you know, the DEA has committed to a conditional basic income grant of 585 Rand a month. We have also expanded the basket of zero-rated foodstuff. The minister mentioned nothing about that. So we will continue pushing on that. We do support the additional money to the National Prosecuting Authority. We do want to avoid grey listing at all costs. So on a whole, we think that it was a budget from a broken government, and it does not take us forward. In fact, it confirms what we already knew, that our economy is stagnant and government does not know what to do.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Dion George, the spokesperson on finance for the DA. For more reaction, we're going to cross back to Abra on the other side.
Bulelani, thank you very much. With me right now, the Deputy President of the EFF, Mr. Floyd Shivambu. Mr. Shivambu, thank you for speaking to us earlier on when I spoke to your colleague beforehand about expectations. One of the things that came up is obviously the concern about the rising cost of living for South Africans. How much of that was enough about that said during the speech today?
No, look, there is nothing dependable and meaningful which the Minister of Finance said in terms of how do you ameliorate the fact that a lot of our people cannot afford basic services due to the rising cost of fuel, of food, of transport, and of a variety of basic necessities. So there is nothing which was presented by the Minister of Finance today, but at a macro level, the biggest crisis that we are confronted with in South Africa is the fact that the biggest expenditure item in South Africa's budget is to pay for debt services. So at more than 300 billion rand, like you take more than 300 billion rand to pay for debt services in a context where the economy is not growing, in a context where you have not come up with anything to resolve the energy and electricity crisis in particular. That how are you going to grow the economy if you do not have a clear, dependable plan in terms of how you are going to resolve the electricity crisis so that you can grow the economy and then you are able to expand your revenue base and you are not drowned in paying off the debt services. That currently is the hallmark of this revised medium-term budget presented by the minister today. It's one of the saddest realities that we have got a debt which is 70% of the overall GDP at 4.7 trillion rand. And it's one of the things that has to change much more drastically. We need to resolve the energy crisis, the electricity crisis in South Africa. And we must not mislead ourselves that we can solve the electricity crisis without relying and depending on coal as our base load, because there is no renewable energy sources that are going to electrify the entirety of South Africa. We have to come out clear that our base load currently is coal. We are still even constructing Medupi and Kusile to add into the national grid to provide proper, dependable coal. Let us explore different alternatives in terms of the reliability of electricity. There's no economy that can be saved. There's no people who can be developed without a dependable and reliable supply of electricity. And that is the